Good morning, Mr. Speaker, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, permit me, before making my contribution here today, to express thanks to the Almighty God who has guided me through my first year as a parliamentarian and government minister. To the people of Choiseul and Saltibus who elected me and whose voice I am in this chamber. The people of Choiseul and Saltibus who lift me up in prayer and serve as a source of strength for me, Mr. Speaker, when detractors and disciples of doom and gloom try to tamper with my spirits. I wish to say thank you to my family, Mr. Speaker, for standing with me and believing in me when others have doubted me. Permit me to thank my permanent secretary, staff at the ministry, the board and staff of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, the board management and staff of the Cultural Development Foundation, and the management and staff of the Folk Research Center and the Stakeholder Committee. Without all of them, Mr. Speaker, this year would not have been possible. Mr. Speaker, I stand here in support of the Appropriation Bill 2013-2014, a bill which outlines the policies of a thinking Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. A true leader, Mr. Speaker, who will guide this treasured land of ours through the trying times of economic recession to economic recovery and the path of economic prosperity that this country was on prior to the 2006 general elections. Mr. Speaker, my learned colleague, the member for Ancillary Canrees, during his presentation on the estimates of expenditure, alluded to an address which was delivered by the governor of the central bank, Sir Dwight Venner. And in that address, Sir Dwight stated that leadership and management were what we needed to drive our economies through difficult times. At that time, Mr. Speaker, whilst my learned colleague was making that statement, and in one of the rare opportunities when I glanced to this side of the political divide, I observed the leader of the opposition in one of his characteristic vacant smiles. And I was forced to look again, do a double take, because I was sure that the statement which was made by Sir Dwight was that what we needed was sound leadership and management, and that this is what was required. And Mr. Speaker, even the blind can see that there's no reason, in light of a statement of this nature, for the leader of the opposition to be all in smiles, as he can in no way, no shape, no form, and be embraced by any of the statements which were made by Sir Dwight Venner. Mr. Speaker, my view in this regard was fortified by the fact that only a few days prior to our debate on the estimates, I listened very attentively to the biography of the leader of the opposition, as it was so eloquently delivered on national television by none other than the former chairman of the United Workers' Party, Mr. Clem Bob. I asked myself, Mr. Speaker, would a man with any sense of self-respect and pride be smiling at a time like this? More so, Mr. Speaker, when you, former Prime Minister, parliamentarian, now leader of the opposition, you're being challenged for the leadership of your own party by a man who has no seat. He can't win a seat. The very man you swore by, to the extent that you allowed him to mama guy you into getting fellas to jump over you on stage and all kinds of things. And you so flippantly allowed him to squander the money allocated to the St. Lucia Tourist Board, Mr. Speaker. And time again in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, I will allude to this as they sit down there, philosoph, trying to make us believe that bad governance is on this side of the political divide when they know exactly where it exists, Mr. Speaker. You know, embraced by a man, you know, a man whose greatest accomplishment, you know, look at who's challenging you. A man whose greatest accomplishment, Mr. Speaker, and I say it profoundly in this House, the greatest accomplishment of former Minister Alan Shasney was when on the eve of the general elections, he broke down the Soufre Bridge, the dumbest move in the history of local politics, which properly sealed his fate at the hands of the mighty Harold Dalso. You know, what is he? Criticizing us, criticizing the Prime Minister. He said the Prime Minister he said he has no vision and he's an amateur. An amateur? Imagine being called an amateur, a penis guamizo, with nothing but delusions of grandeur, you know, things caused by a disease of the mind that we casually on this side of the House refer to as the loss of power syndrome.
Honorable Member, I think I need to guide you towards what is before the House and the debate and try to refrain from the individual comments towards individuals.
Because I am tying it in, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I am tying it in, Mr. Speaker, to the issues of wastage, which are strong policy positions that this government holds to, Mr. Speaker. There shall not be wastage, Mr. Speaker, of the budgets that have been allotted to various ministries. Mr. Speaker, before I go further, Mr. Speaker, I had to allude also to another part of the statement which was made by Sir Dwight Venner. And it's instructive, Mr. Speaker, as it bears significant relevance to the direction that has been taken by our learned Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in this budget. And Sir Dwight Venner indicated, Mr. Speaker, and if you allow me to quote, that not only were our problems, were not primarily about money, but the solutions demanded a radical shift in our approach and thinking. He said that the current circumstances pose a very real threat to our actual existence as independent nations and require major approaches to changes in the way we think and solve our problems at all levels. Mr. Speaker, he recommended change in policies over which we have control and said that it comes down to two fundamental factors whether your economy is large or small: leadership and management. Without the benefit of this intellectual discourse, Mr. Speaker, on the 20th day of November, a good day, Mr. Speaker, in the history of this country, the people of this land determined that what they needed was sound leadership, and the leadership of Dr. Kenny Anthony and the good and prudent governance of the St. Lucia Labour Party is what they wanted. But, Mr. Speaker, what Sir Dwight indicated, that this is no time in our history for pawns posturing as kings to be at the helm of government. This is no time for indecisive leadership. This is only a time for leadership, leaders whose decisions are consistent, not those whose decision-making is as inconsistent, or consistent rather, as the ebbs and flows of the seas that surround our beautiful island. Mr. Speaker, this is a time for leaders who are visionaries, leaders who are willing to make bold decisions such as those taken by our Prime Minister with issues such as the implementation of VAT, Mr. Speaker, because this was needed by our country. Whether this decision is popular or not, we have to make bold decisions that are in the best interests of our country. This is what we have been elected to do, Mr. Speaker, and this is what this government will do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need leaders who can be honest with our public servants by letting them know what we can afford to do in our current situation. Not those whose primary purpose is their political preservation at any cost whatsoever, without any care on the impact of their decisions, Mr. Speaker, on recurrent expenditure. And today, the situation that we found ourselves in, which have led us to make the critical decisions that the Prime Minister has presented, is because of the economic unsound decisions that were made by the former government, Mr. Speaker. Johnny Joe, Mr. Speaker, weak leaders. We couldn't hear from them. Couldn't hear from them for years. Disgraced tourism ministers, all of them, philosoph, you know, giving expertise on everything. You know, Mr. Speaker, the decision taken by the Prime Minister, and I applaud him, to reduce the capital budget and to impose fiscal cuts, it's a bold initiative. And I applaud the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. I commend him, and I assure him, Mr. Speaker, that by virtue of the trust that he has placed in me as Minister, by virtue of the trust that he has placed in the Ministry of Tourism to drive economic activity during the course of this year, we will work tirelessly, Mr. Speaker, to bring the returns that this country needs. Mr. Speaker, the sound policies for good governance and the agenda for economic growth and fiscal stability contained in the budget address delivered by the Prime Minister are consistent with those contained in the blueprint for growth. Unlike those on the other side, Mr. Speaker, who they prepare manifestos, for the sole purpose of telling the electorate what they want to hear or what they think they want to hear. We on this side of the House intend to be guided by the policies in our blueprint for growth and to answer and to explain any shortcomings at the appropriate time. Mr. Speaker, it's a document of the House, and I allude to page 14 of the blueprint for growth. And at page 14, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party acknowledged that due to the major contribution that tourism makes to the development of this country, that it would, on assuming office, ensure that the tourism development is afforded high priority in the development agenda. This consistent message, Mr. Speaker, is echoed by the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, at page 57 of his address, where he stated that despite the cutbacks in the capital program, that he would allot the same level of support, that level of support being the sum of $45 million, which was provided last year for tourism marketing. Mr. Speaker, at least this year, the Ministry and the Tourist Board are not burdened by the $7 million+ debt that we had to repay to American Airlines as a result of the sheer brilliance of former Minister Alan Chasney. $7 million+. Yes. And this gives us, Mr. Speaker, the latitude to undertake new initiatives and to pursue markets which were markets to which mere lip service, I would indicate, were paid by the former minister. Mr. Speaker, at page 15 of the Blueprint for Growth, we stated that our party is committed to improving the standard of St. Lucia jazz and returning it to its position of prominence on the global music landscape. We stated again, Mr. Speaker, at page 15 of the Blueprint for Growth, that we will ensure that there is adequate participation by St. Lucians in all aspects of this activity. So, Mr. Speaker, consistent with this policy, a directive was given to the board which led to the birth of the new St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival. From its inception, Mr. Speaker, from its inception, those over there who are so accustomed to, everything Minister Chasney did, he spent millions of dollars to get it done. They couldn't believe that this revamped Jazz and Arts Festival was the brainchild, work, and effort of hard-thinking St. Lucians. Couldn't believe it. So after we rebranded it, what happened? Even tall white fellas do this. Former Minister Alan Chasney looks into his crystal ball and predicts that the event would be a resounding failure. He criticized the board publicly for having the opening of jazz at Marshall. It's clearly not bougie enough for him. You know, call it a waste of taxpayers' money, aided and abetted by some of his colleagues. Once he says it, they support it. You know? But you know what, Mr. Speaker? The interesting thing, all of those, you know, who criticized the festival, they said it's too much money, it's this, it's that. You should have heard them the week before jazz, harassing my personal assistant looking for free tickets. All of them. You what? Yeah, deliberate. I asked them to send them to my office. And all of them, not you, sir, not you, sir. Not you. Mr. James, you accepted. But the rest, look to your right, harassing my personal assistant. But Mr. Speaker, I'll move on. You know, Mr. Speaker, God is good. And the record numbers, Mr. Speaker, that attended the lunch in the pouring rain clearly laughed in the faces of all of the doubting Thomases, Mr. Speaker, and proved once again that the former minister, his words, what is he? Self-aggrandizing mouthpiece for himself. Mr. Speaker, I will give you the results. This year, Mr. Speaker, for the very first time in the history of the festival, the attendance numbers at the Jazz Festival surpassed 20,000. Wow. 20,000 patrons. A record number, more than 3,000 more than the best year of jazz on our books, Mr. Speaker. By all accounts, a resounding success, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say hats off, kudos to the hard-working staff of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the impact of St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival, Mr. Speaker, is felt both economically and within the various societies, both economically, and the opportunities that it provided for the various artists and artisans, Mr. Speaker, cannot be codified. We gave them an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to showcase their talents on an international platform. And they are, Mr. Speaker, many of them have indicated that they are in fact thankful to the government of St. Lucia, want to say thanks to the Prime Minister for his vision and for the investment in them to promote their interests. So I say, Dr. Anthony, thank you once again for believing in the Ministry of Tourism, Heritage and Creative Industries, and thank you for your investment in the artists of this country, Mr. Speaker. And they made him proud. They made him proud. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, I listened very attentively, you know, and I was actually hoping that the member for Castries Southeast would have resisted his urge to take a swipe at the Ministry of Tourism. But Mr. Speaker, it seems he just can't help himself. He actually suggested that a cost-cutting measure that this government could look at is the possible elimination of the festival. And I was shocked. And I really hope that when he said that, that all the artists in St. Lucia heard that. Yeah. And they will have an appropriate response for him at an appropriate time. So I had to ask myself, Mr. Speaker, and I asked my staff, you know, what is the obsession of this minister with tourism? What is his expertise that leads him to always want to be jumping on tourism? You know, beyond the fact that maybe at some stage he drove a few of them around the place, you know. So after making this inquiry at the board, I got an answer as to why he's so interested in tourism. Because when we talk about wastage of funds, Mr. Speaker, the financial records of the board, and you know, unlike them, I come with my information. I go to the financial controller and I get a document, which I'll gladly make a document of this house, because the financial records of the board show that during his tenure, maybe as junior minister of tourism, he benefited from the marketing budget because he traveled on more than one occasion at the expense of the board. Absent member from Castries Southeast. Traveled, yes, at the expense of the tourist board. Sea Trade, Miami. And he met other people there, but that's for another forum. Yeah? Goes to American Airlines meeting, Carnival meeting, even on airlift committee it looks like, you know, traveling, because tourist board has money, but we can spend it. And you turn around, Philos off telling us how to deal with our current budget. Yeah. So, travel on more than one occasion. And you know, the interesting thing, Mr. Speaker, whilst we talk about how we allocate our budget, he wasn't the only minister. Imagine that. Mr. Speaker, even, and this should come as a shock to the whole world, Mr. Speaker, even Duke Bois, and I wish the leader of the opposition wouldn't read at this time, but even Duke Bois, who was not the press secretary for the former government, goes on an all-expense-paid trip to the United Kingdom. No wonder you don't like me that much. I don't send him anywhere. You know? All expense paid trip to the United Kingdom at the expense of the tourist board. For what? For what? You know? And they talk about us not caring for poor people and using money in ways that are not beneficial to the poor people and doing things inimical to the interests of St. Lucians, and you wasting government's money. Mr. Speaker, that's loan money, you know. Yes. That money has to be repaid for years by St. Lucian people, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Yeah. No wonder. Can't take my name out of his mouth every morning almost. This sort of thing, Mr. Speaker. That's why on page 14, Mr. Speaker, of the Blueprint for Growth, one of the policies has to be, don't waste the budget of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, Mr. Speaker. You know, you talk about waste. You know, they ask questions, Mr. Speaker. And you must excuse me if I seem passionate when I talk about jazz and the things that came up, Mr. Speaker. Not just it was a success. You say the amount of pressure I got before that jazz came on, Mr. Speaker, ask it. They want to know how much he paid for R. Kelly. Mr. Speaker, they want to know how much we paid for R. Kelly. Now I can assure them, do as I do and dig. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that we did not pay anywhere near the $1 million that they paid for one artist in 2009 who performed for, who is no longer on this earth, who performed for 20 minutes. And I will make as a document of the House, Mr. Speaker, so that everyone can see. I don't lie. I bring facts. I tell them, when you ask me questions and you prick me, don't play with me. I know what I will come up with. $977,715.09. I'll make it a document of the House for you to see how they spend our taxpayers' money, Mr. Speaker. And they want to point fingers at me. And point fingers at the Prime Minister. You see dollars so far. $977,715.09. Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse. 20 minutes. If so much. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, I listened again, Mr. Speaker, yesterday as the member for Castries Southeast engaged in a unique form of village economics and alluded to the cost of small consultancies, Mr. Speaker, embarked upon by this government. And we agreed before, all governments, Mr. Speaker, engage consultants. But what he did, Mr. Speaker, in a futile attempt to draw negative analogies to this side, was to impute that the cost of these small consultancies could have significantly affected our position in dealing with the issue of the salaries of public servants. That was horrible. Horrible. Mr. Speaker, from that standpoint, it became apparent to me that amnesia in opposition is a malady, clearly, that all of them seem to suffer from. Mr. Speaker, I was hoping that he, as the junior Minister of Tourism, would have recalled that one of the biggest payouts by way of a consultancy was done by his bourgeois, former Minister Alan Chasney, because he paid his bourgeois as well, Mr. Jim Heppel, for 2 years, you know. 2 years we employed him as a consultant. $900,000, Mr. Speaker, of taxpayers' money went into that. No, that's easy. In just under 2 years, $900,000 paid to Mr. Jim Heppel, a consultant. And you look at people, you know, we have a consultant, this is the classification, and they were all on the radio talking about Mr. Hunt. Small consultancy. But the boy worked hard, the young man, sorry. Worked hard. Worked hard. Was the heart, soul, and the feet of the Creative Industries Ministry. And for nothing, not even a fraction of this, Mr. Speaker. You know? So don't try, as my learned colleague says, no flashing mirrors, no wool over people's eyes. Speak the truth, man. You know? Luckily, Mr. Speaker, when Mr. Heppel couldn't take it anymore, he resigned. You know? You know? And you know, on wastage, Mr. Speaker, you know, we employ, and I say this over and over again about my pride in the staff of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, because they are not just well-educated, but they're a hard-working team of people, Mr. Speaker. You know, why do we employ technocrats if we don't intend to use them? A minister, Mr. Speaker, and I've been made to understand it, and I understand it well, is a policy director, Mr. Speaker. You bring government policy to bear on the affairs of the ministry and oversee other things. But we have technocrats inside of there. Mr. Speaker, I have alluded to in the past the cost of travel of the former Minister Alan Chasney, the $980,791, just a little shy of $1 million. But Mr. Speaker, what is more telling is that this record of travel for the former minister shows clearly that he postured himself as having a monopoly of knowledge on all matters related to travel and tourism, because he traveled on his own. He hardly saw it necessary to walk along with his technocrats, those same people who are supposed to implement the policies that he ought to brought to bear through government. I heard that, Mr. Speaker, he's like a kid in a candy store, and they'll want to say where he got to say it. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll make everything documents of the House. I have a whole long list for years of meetings attended to on his own, with technical meetings where his technical people were supposed to go. And I want these to be made documents of the House, so children way beyond my years can see what was being done by that government in office, Mr. Speaker, and nobody will ever repeat that again. I want to make each one of these a document of the House. What they have here, Mr. Speaker, travels. And look at this, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes I really feel our Prime Minister is being hard on us. But imagine, you go to a meeting. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, if I may, 30th July to 1st August, meetings in Washington, D.C. What meetings? Meetings with USA. Okay, that's more consistent. Meetings in Miami. What meetings? But just before that, you went to a meeting in Miami for American Airlines. So just shortly afterwards, you have another meeting. Phones don't work again. Skype doesn't work. Internet doesn't work. So you fly over at every possible opportunity. Mr. Speaker, for the children of this country to be able to see it at every time. This is going to be made a document of the House. So we have a record for all those who want to say it didn't happen. A record of the activities in office, Mr. Speaker. And I have more. Mr. Speaker, you know, I give the assurance, Mr. Speaker, that this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue and we will work hard. Mr. Speaker, the wastage that happened in government, you see, now that we see budget cuts, capital cuts, Mr. Speaker, I tabulated, Mr. Speaker, what the wastage out of the Ministry of Tourism for the last 5 years, the tourist board, Mr. Speaker, single-handedly at the hands of the former minister. And Mr. Speaker, $51 million, Mr. Speaker, $51 million, $477,617. I calculated it down to the last dollar. Mr. Speaker, this sum could fund our social programs. Nice, smile, yep. And it could serve to fund the capital budget for the creative industries for years. Build roads and bridges. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, there was an accident in Choiseul again. You think we don't need barriers in a number of places? Yeah? But we have to find the money somewhere. And when we look in hindsight and see what was done with the money of the people of this country, we have to be upset. We have to complain. Forgive me if I vex, real vex about this, Mr. Speaker. $51 million. I have roads that need to be built. I have families that need to be fed, children that need to be sent to school. And we have to find a solution for them. Whilst when they were in office, they squandered, lived their life, their largesse, Mr. Speaker. Kids in a candy store never see come to see. Mr. Speaker, I listen when Minister responsible for Agriculture, Minister Jean-Baptiste, indicates that under tight circumstances, under tight conditions, he's managed to steer his ship. And agriculture is showing signs of progress, Mr. Speaker. $51 million would have done great in that ministry to restore pride, full pride to the agricultural sector in this country. You know, Mr. Speaker, let me assure the nation that before we can deliver on our promise for better days, Mr. Speaker, we must first make sacrifices, and hard decisions have to be made. But we will make the hard decisions, and at the end you will see the light of day. Better days will come for the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, you know, the member from Castries Southeast, and that's why I still am, you know. Again. You know. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, my team, I want to speak about my team from the St. Lucia Tourist Board, Mr. Speaker. Just as we delivered on the Jazz and Arts Festival, and we will, Mr. Speaker, continue to embark on a number of initiatives which this year's budget will allow us to do. Mr. Speaker, we survived 20% loss of our airlift, Mr. Speaker. We experienced at the end of the day a 2% increase in spend in St. Lucia. We will deliver on our efforts, Mr. Speaker, to penetrate Brazil and Latin America. And I was pleased when the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, made that announcement. It shows that once again, Mr. Speaker, the public, the private sector, Mr. Speaker, has restored confidence in this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will make St. Lucia Showcase North America, Mr. Speaker, the success that St. Lucia Showcase out of the United Kingdom was, Mr. Speaker. We will launch and develop the St. Lucia Wedding Symposium in September, as I indicated, and pursue Canada and Martinique market expansion programs, all during the course of this year, within the confines of the budget that we have. But Mr. Speaker, before I go into other things, and I hope I'll have the time to touch on a number of them, because they're very important. You see, I heard the member for Castries Southeast say yesterday, and I like it when they quote, you know, Mr. Speaker, you know, judge a man not by his words, but by his deeds. I say, eh? By his deeds. I say, okay. I endorse that, Mr. Speaker. It's, you know, and then I hear all these pretensions, allusions to scripture and touts. Who Jah bless? Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish at this time to give the nation an insight, not into who Jah bless, but how Jah bless. You know, Mr. Speaker, on the 20th day of November, I'm going, Mr. Speaker, very quickly into the review of financial operations of towns and village and rural councils, Mr. Speaker. You see, on the night of the general elections, Mr. Speaker, I told the people of Choiseul that we had certain information. We thought we knew certain things about how the village council was being dealt with. I gave them my word that we will endeavor to get to the bottom of it. On the 29th, we had a recount. All of them were jumping around. Lorne lost, Lorne lost, Lorne lost. Who didn't win, who didn't win? Don't worry, I took it off. And on the morning of the 30th, my first official business as the parliamentary representative of Choiseul and Saltibus was to walk into the village council and demand that I get a full printout of that account that is being spoken about, Mr. Speaker, that new account that they opened. Because I know, you see, the report here says about when, after elections, the former minister got documents, got checks. I know that was coming, so I went for it first. Don't play with good lawyers, Mr. Speaker. Yeah? So, I'll make as a document of the House to supplement the Town and Village Council's report. Every transaction from start to finish, Mr. Speaker, so it'll never be lost. Every transaction that went through that Village Council's account. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, my sole care is to see to it that the money that was given for the benefit of the people of Choiseul and Saltibus is used for the exclusive benefit, Mr. Speaker. Nobody else, Mr. Speaker, should be allowed to benefit from this. You know, I look in this report, Mr. Speaker, and when I listen to the cries of the people of Choiseul, and I understand now these same characters walking around the constituency, oh, Lorne, too busy to take care of your interests, and take us back. The people need to know, Mr. Speaker, what these very characters have done with monies that were vested in them in trust for their benefit, Mr. Speaker. Look at that. On page 158, Mr. Speaker, 158, you have projects given, one estimated cost, another amount paid. I tallied, Mr. Speaker, you notice at the bottom that they did not tally the difference in Choiseul. The difference between estimated cost and the amount paid. $218,168.44. You know, what is that if not fraud? Huh? And look at the names. Interesting names. Interesting names, Mr. Speaker. Jimmy Haynes.
Who's that?
Jimmy Haynes. Peter Reds Phillip. Inside there, Mr. Speaker. Okay. And Mr. Speaker, the interesting thing is that this difference in amounts paid and estimated costs doesn't end there. Because, Mr. Speaker, as good lawyers do, we research. So you take every single copy of a bigger project, the Morgush Community Center, contract amount $470,959.77. Amount paid $720,727. And I brought every single document coming from SSDF, from the financial controller, and I would like to make all of them documents of this House so that we can view them at leisure to see what is done with the monies of the people of this country. When my people of Choiseul and Saltibus are suffering and asking for roads and bridges, Mr. Speaker, where is it? We see contracts inside of here for the Fiat Road. Mr. Speaker, the minister responsible for infrastructure knows I've said about Fiat Road over and over and over again. But we have to find the money to do it. But contracts given to fix road on the eve of our general elections are not a thing done. But that day of reckoning is coming. And those who ask, and they think, what, grand judge, wrong side of the house. Those who ask to do something about it, take action. Your wish is not my command, but I'll be very happy when we fulfill that wish. Make your wish a reality. We'll take action. Not because it's you, but in the interest of the people of this country, in the interest of the children of this country. Because in taking those monies, Mr. Speaker, and allotting them for your private purposes, you are depriving the children of this country of a future, Mr. Speaker, compromising them. Yeah, Virginia, whoever won. Mr. Speaker, within our limited confines, Mr. Speaker, I mean, the ministry has continued to strive, continued to push aggressively in the programs that we have, Mr. Speaker. Oh, sorry, I forgot a very important part, Mr. Speaker. The Moroccan funds, oh. How could I forget that, Mr. Speaker? You see, you know, when I make a bad decision, Mr. Speaker, within the space of a week, I can assure you, the Prime Minister will call and say, Lorne? Did you do X, Y, or Z thing? And in the back of your mind, you say, wait, Missy, Mid found that out. You know, it's not the best. You didn't do anything so wrong, but you could have thought differently before. But it shows he knows, and he's in control, because he's a prime minister. You know? Yeah, I've taken therapy regularly, and I've learned. And it's for our good, Mr. Speaker, so that we can engage in the best practices of government. All of a sudden, Moroccan government gives us $800 and something thousand for the building of a stadium in Choiseul. Everybody wants a stadium. I want to see the stadium bad too. But when I went in for the village council account at the first possible opportunity, on the 30th day of November, balance $611,224.84. But you see, what the auditors here didn't know when they went into Choiseul is that included there is $100,000 given by the Japanese for buying the backhoe that we bought. So it's not just the difference of $200,000, there's an extra $100,000 missing. And only $40,000 spent, Mr. Speaker, on doing anything for the stadium. Where the money gone? You know? Acorn sings, lip syncs. They calling me as minister. Money not going in the consolidated fund, and we allowing the former prime minister to say, I don't know what happened. Did this really happen? You are responsible as the captain of the ship. You are responsible as the Minister of Finance. That is why, Mr. Speaker, when we came into office, we said this egregious practice of money is not going to the consolidated fund will never happen under this government, Mr. Speaker. So,
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes remaining to conclude your contribution.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Speaker, at an appropriate time, date, and venue, All those persons who are around singing and calling me nice names in Choiseul will have to answer to the people of Choiseul, not to me, the people of Choiseul, as to what happened with their monies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are not resting on our laurels, and I wanted to mention that, Mr. Speaker, because at this time, Mr. Speaker, we are out pursuing a number of areas where we can get investment in our country. And I'm proud to say that I returned from Dubai filled with enthusiasm. A trip, member for Miku North, which was arranged by none other than Ambassador Melissa Rambali. I thank her for that. Contacts that were made through her offices, and I was accompanied, Mr. Speaker, by a technocrat of the tourist board at the expense of the Saudi government, Mr. Speaker. It cost us nothing, but we will pursue aggressively the linkages that were made there, Mr. Speaker, to see how we can derive benefits for our country. Mr. Speaker, in the area of yachting, we, Mr. Speaker, during the course of next year, are going to attract a regatta. It's called a business regatta, Mr. Speaker, Russian business regatta. And as part of this regatta, which will take place during the month of March, Mr. Speaker, we will attract 150 mega yachts with businessmen, their spouses and families who are going to be in St. Lucia for a period of 7 days and nights. We will host them, Mr. Speaker, as part of the regatta and explore business opportunities with them. We are going to be working, Mr. Speaker, hand in hand with Invest St. Lucia, who are going to champion the way forward in terms of driving investments to this country. We will be introducing, Mr. Speaker, years ago, there was an event called Aqua Action, Mr. Speaker, which did well for St. Lucia, did well for St. Lucians. We are going to reintroduce this event this year, Mr. Speaker. Reintroduce it in a new way. It is going to contain a number of sporting and sailing events, Mr. Speaker, which is going to hype the interest in sailing, windsurfing, boat building. We are in direct contact with our colleagues out of Martinique and Guadeloupe, Mr. Speaker, who have expressed extreme interest in this event. And hopefully, Mr. Speaker, we will manage to derive sufficient returns to this country through the hosting of this event once again. We mentioned before that our legislative agenda will include the registration of yachts in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Legislation will be put in place so that we can register yachts in St. Lucia, something that we look forward to and will help in building the returns that we derive from the yachting sector. Mr. Speaker, there's so much more. The creative industries, oh Lord, they give me blows. The consultant, he this, he that, he the other. But that young man, Mr. Speaker, whether you like him or not, you know, he might be unique, but his heart and soul is in it. And he works hard. The same way they criticize what's happening in our foreign missions. But Mr. Speaker, our cultural attaché in Martinique, whether you like him or not, Mr. Speaker, is working hard. Working hard. And this carnival, you know, I didn't say much before jazz, and I waited for the numbers to speak for themselves. But this carnival, he will deliver, Mr. Speaker. We have record numbers likely to come from Martinique and Guadeloupe, thanks to his efforts. So our missions are working, Mr. Speaker. The investment we made in them was money well spent. Well spent, Mr. Speaker. But we, Mr. Speaker, are going about our business differently. You know, we, in the creative industry sector, in the creative industry sector, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that we are going to engage in a grant program. It's not just a question of, so that we can provide seed money giving opportunities to a number of people who need them. But we're going to do it from an organized approach, Mr. Speaker. Would you believe, in the past, there was actually some dealing with the creative industry sector, Mr. James? You knew that? You knew that? That there was something in the creative industry sector? Because, Mr. Speaker, why we have to do it in a structured manner? Because we want to ensure that those people who need the help are saved at times from politicians, from people who may have certain biases. Because when I see a letter from the Permanent Secretary Finance instructing CDF to make payments to people for grants which should come out of $151.5 million. I say, but wait a minute. They did not write to Mr. James, who is Minister of Education and Culture, but instruct CDF to pay monies. Mr. Speaker, good governance entails that we avoid practices like this. At another time, Mr. Speaker, I'll spend a lot more time on the creative industry sector, and I will go into detail into some of the practices, the abhorrent practices, Mr. Speaker, where monies were wasted. So our creative industries now becomes a free-for-all. You know, run to the Prime Minister's office, come out with $120,000, no follow-up, no measures put in place to ensure that the public monies are spent properly. Good leaders do not act in this way, Mr. Speaker. And later on today, we'll hear philosoph, oh, you know, telling us everything that we're supposed to do. But when they had the opportunity, they didn't do it. All of a sudden. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend, Mr. Speaker, again, the Prime Minister. I want to commend my team of cabinet colleagues for a job well done under hard and trying circumstances, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes the road is tough. But when we stick to the ideals that guide us, Mr. Speaker, the ideals of bread, justice, and freedom, we will continue to work in the best interests of St. Lucia and St. Lucians, and the children of this country will have a good future. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.